In this lesson we're gonna do some refactoring and specifically improve activity generation process. But before that, let's fix that validation issue which happens after we create new activity. So if this is happening when we create new activity, we need to open up component which is responsible for activity creation. It's the activity form component. And in here, when we send this form, we fire custom event submit to parent component. And along with this event, we send a new activity name. But since now our activities are represented by objects instead of strings, we need to tweak activity creation process a bit, and instead of passing simple string with this submit event, we need to create an activity object with properties ID, name, and seconds to complete, and pass this whole object to parent component. So for generating ID, we're gonna use ID function. The name which user specifies in the text field is stored within activity reactive variable. And by default, all newly created activities will have value 0 for seconds to complete property. So let's just import ID function from functions module and rename activity variable on something more specific, because this variable stores only activity name, but not the whole activity object. We'll call this variable name and rename it wherever needed. And a couple more occurrences of this variable we also have in template. Let's rename it in here. So now once user will submit activity creation form, we'll fire submit event and pass activity object to parent component. The parent component already has a listener registered to handle this submit event. And then this listener will pass newly created activity object along with create activity event to our root component. So that root component can appropriately handle this event, which it does by using create activity handler function. And all this function is doing is adding new activity to the end of the activities array. But now, since we passed the whole activity object instead of just a simple string, we're gonna get this object within activity parameter and pass this object to push method to add it to activities array. So we don't need to manually create this activity object again in here. And this way ID function is no longer used in this component. Let's remove this import. And then I'm gonna go and add new activity. Then remove all activities from this list, just to make sure that those actions will not produce any validation warnings. And as we can see, console remains empty, so all our data is valid. And at the end of this lesson, let's just go ahead and refactor generate activities function within functions.js file. This function is used to create initial list of activities that we show on activities page. And in order to not repeat ourselves, we're gonna rewrite all this in a little bit different way. So for example, what we can do in here is to declare array of strings, which would be activity names like so, and then map over every activity name and create activity object, which will consist of 3 fields, ID, name, and seconds to complete. So the name of the activity we're gonna receive in the first parameter name, which we use in here. And as a second parameter to this closure, we receive an activity name index from this array. And we can use this hours variable in this expression to calculate value for seconds to complete property. And now we have basically rewritten everything that was written in here in more concise form. So let's remove this whole chunk of code right now. And in Vue DevTools, we see that the array of activities is represented by activity objects. Each of those contains 3 fields, ID, name, and seconds to complete, just like before. And by removing or adding new activities, we can see that this activities array gets updated and new activity objects are pushed to the end of this array. So we are in a pretty good state to continue development in the next lesson.